Welcome to the Mind Cut series. Have you ever felt intensely drawn to someone? Maybe, to the point where it just took up so much space in your head?
Yeah, like all your thoughts somehow lead back to them.
Exactly. And maybe that person wasn't even really available. Today, we're diving deep into that whole experience, something called limerence.
Limerence. It's a powerful state, and honestly, a lot of people might have gone through it without actually knowing the term for it.
Right. So, while it's not like a formal diagnosis you'd get from a doctor.
No, not technically, but it's a really significant human experience, something a lot of folks grapple with.
Okay, so in this deep dive, what's our mission? What are we trying to figure out?
Well, we want to really unpack it, understand what it actually is, how it's genuinely different from, say, a big crush or even unrequited love.
And maybe where it comes from, its roots.
Definitely. Exploring where it might stem from, maybe past experiences and how it impacts our lives. We've looked at, online discussions, psychological takes, personal stories, trying to get a rounded view.
Good stuff. So let's jump right in. This term, limerence, they said it was coined back in the 70s by Dorothy Tenoff.
That's right, psychologist Dorothy Tenoff. Initially, she used it to describe that sort of intense buzz of falling in love, the early stages.
But it seems like the way we talk about it now is a bit more specific. Like we're not just talking about those fun butterflies in your stomach feelings.
Exactly. Well, yeah, those early romantic feelings could technically be seen as a starting point.
Yeah.
The key thing about limerence, as it's often discussed now, is how it ramps up.
Ramps up how?
It kind of escalates from that initial spark into, well, almost an addiction-level obsession with another person.
Wow, addiction level.
Yeah, and a really crucial piece is often the unavailability of the person you're focused on, the low or limerent object.
Oh, right. So they might just not be interested, or maybe they're already with someone else.
Or, and this is wild, they might even be fictional, like a character in a book or movie.
Fictional. Okay, that really underlines how much of this is happening inside the person experiencing it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's very internally driven.
So we all know what a crush feels like. Where's the line? When does it tip over from just a strong crush into this more intense, potentially problematic limerent state?
Well, think about a typical infatuation or crush. Most of us have been there, right? And usually, thankfully, those feelings tend to simmer down over time, even if the other person doesn't feel the same way.
Yeah, they usually fade. Painful maybe, but they fade.
Right. Limerence, though, it has this really persistent quality. It hangs on. It feels, like I said, almost addictive.
Addictive? Like how addictive are we talking?
But one source we looked at made a really, really strong comparison. It suggested overcoming limerence can sometimes feel as hard as kicking a heroin addiction.
Whoa. Okay, that puts it in perspective. That's definitely not just a crush fading away on its own.
Not at all. That intensity, that difficulty letting go, that's a hallmark.
So how does this stack up against just plain old unrequited love? Because that's also about wanting someone you can't have, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's the subtle difference there?
That's a great question. You could say unrequited love is often the condition or the situation within which limerence thrives.
Ah, okay. So the unrequited part fuels the limerence.
Exactly. It's like the lack of reciprocation paradoxically keeps going. It's driven by this incredibly strong, almost addictive sense of hope.
Addictive hope. That's interesting.
Yeah, apparently there's a neurological basis for hope. And in limerence, it just keeps that cycle spinning even when there's barely any or zero actual evidence that the feelings are returned.
Wow. And you mentioned earlier potential links to childhood.
Yes, that's a really significant thread. Some sources definitely connect it to early experiences, particularly things like childhood neglect.
How so?
Well, there were recurring themes in personal stories we saw. People who, say, grew up with alcoholic parents facing that kind of inconsistency or unavailability.
Right.
And then later in life, they found themselves developing these consuming obsessions with people who were similarly unavailable. And it wasn't just a feeling. It really disrupted their lives, their jobs, their other relationships.
That connection feels really key. It suggests the intense focus on this unavailable person. Maybe it's less about them specifically.
And more about an unmet need or a pattern learned way back when.
Exactly. Like the pursuit itself becomes the main thing, even if it's draining and doesn't actually lead anywhere healthy.
Precisely. Think about healthy love. It tends to build you up, right? You feel supported, happier, you grow. Limerence often feels like Well, like a downward ladder.
A downward ladder. How do you mean?
People might start pulling away from friends, family. They become emotionally unavailable to anyone else, even people who are interested and available. It's hard to feel affection for others when you're so consumed.
So even though all the energy feels directed at the LO,
Fundamentally, it's not really about them. It's rooted deep inside. Unmet needs, this intense, often unconscious longing.
and what about keeping it secret? Does that play a part? People often don't tell the LO how they feel, right? Fear of rejection.
Oh, absolutely. Secrecy is huge. That fear of rejection is powerful, so they don't disclose the true depth of their feelings.
And keeping it hidden, does that somehow make it stronger?
It kind of creates this protected bubble, a fantasy world. By not saying it out loud, not risking the potential no, they can hold on to the idealized image of the LO, the possibility of it working out.
Even though it stops them from actually connecting with real people.
Exactly. It's like this weird form of emotional self-protection that actually keeps them stuck. Which brings up another angle. Can this happen inside a relationship?
You mean someone could be in a committed relationship but still experience limerence? Maybe for their partner.
Potentially, yes.
Right.
Especially in certain dynamics, like maybe an anxious avoidant relationship.
Ah, okay. Where one person is always seeking reassurance and the other pulls away. How would limerence fit in there?
Well, the thinking is that elements of it can definitely show up. It's often linked to things like trauma bonding or intermittent reinforcement.
Intermittent reinforcement. Like
Yeah.
getting attention sometimes, but unpredictably.
Precisely. That dynamic, the chasing, the pulling away, the occasional reward or sign of affection, it can actually trigger limerent feelings, especially if that pattern feels familiar from childhood, like emotional neglect.
So that push-pull becomes addictive in itself.
It can, yeah. There's a part of our brain that really responds to that chase, that intermittent attention. It can be quite powerful.
I remember one source mentioned someone who experimented with their dating style.
Yeah.
Like deliberately stopped chasing and let the other person pursue.
Yes. And they found it really revealing. It showed them how easily that natural instinct to pursue can kind of go off the rails and become disordered, unhealthy.
Because a little bit of chasing might be normal, but this is different.
Exactly. It crosses a line. So let's talk about what that feels like day to day. If you're experiencing limerence, what's going on inside? What's that emotional landscape?
From the descriptions, it sounds like a total emotional roller coaster, like tiny little positive signs from the LO.
A quick text message, maybe a smile.
Yeah, and that leads to this massive high, like elation. But then, just as quickly, you can crash down into feeling really depressed or despairing.
That's a very accurate picture. It sounds exhausting, frankly, constantly chasing that little hit of perceived reciprocation.
Trying to get some sign they feel the same, but without actually putting your cards on the table because you're terrified of rejection.
Right. And the imagination. It works overtime, doesn't
That's
it?
definitely. People describe analyzing every tiny gesture, every word, even things like, I don't know, a song someone posts on social media.
Gets interpreted as a secret message, a sign of hidden affection.
Exactly. It's like building this whole elaborate story in your head based on scraps of evidence.
The mental gymnastics, as you said. So underneath all that, what are the core feelings driving it?
It seems like it boils down to intense anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and despair. Lots of despair.
Punctuated by those fleeting, often illusory moments of joy.
Yeah.
There was that anecdote, remember, about the Thai massage worker.
Oh, yeah, misinterpreting social media posts.
Right. Maybe not full-blown limerence, but it really showed how an intense focus on someone can make you completely misread things based on your own hopes and projections.
Which leads us to the big question. Why? What are the deeper roots? The underlying causes that make someone more likely to fall into this.
It's fascinating because, as sources point out, this isn't some new modern invention. We see it in classic literature all the time.
Like Dante and Beatrice, or Heathcliff and Cathy from Wuthering Heights. That kind of consuming obsession.
Exactly. It suggests this taps into something pretty fundamental, something deep in human psychology.
So what are the theories? You mentioned childhood earlier.
Yeah, research does suggest potential links there. Things like a lack of consistent attention or validation during those really formative years.
Mm-hmm.
It might actually influence how our brains develop, making some people more prone to these kinds of intense, insecure attachments later on.
The need for connection is just so powerful.
It's incredibly powerful. Remember the Harlow monkey experiments?
With the wire mothers, one with food, one with cloth.
Right. And the baby monkeys overwhelmingly chose the comforting cloth mother, even though the wire one had the food. It just shows connection can feel more primary than even basic survival needs sometimes.
Wow. That really drives it home. So could there be like an evolutionary angle to limerence? Did it serve some purpose way back when?
Evolutionary psychology has some interesting ideas. Maybe that intense feeling that must have this person drive.
Right.
Perhaps it helped ensure people pursued mates strongly, even if the long-term prospects weren't great, just to ensure reproduction.
Like the immediate feeling overrides logic.
Kind of. The proximate reward, feeling good, feeling intensely drawn, maybe trumped the ultimate reward of long-term stability or compatibility in certain situations. It's like
Yeah.
a powerful internal prediction of connection, even if it's faulty.
And what about that idea, erotization of abandonment? That sounds complicated.
It is counterintuitive, isn't it? The idea is that if you experienced abandonment or neglect early on, that feeling, that pain can somehow get tangled up with feelings of attraction or desire later.
So you end up drawn to people who might recreate that feeling. Emotionally unavailable people.
Paradoxically, yes. It's as if the familiar pattern, even though painful, feels compelling.
That might explain some things, like the enduring appeal of the bad boy or the difficult person, even when logically you know it's probably not going to lead to a happy, stable relationship.
Exactly. The emotional pull overrides the rational assessment. And often, people deep in limerence pull away from their support systems, right? They hide the LO.
Why? Because they know their friends might disapprove.
Probably. They anticipate judgment or people pointing out the flaws in the fantasy, so they protect it by keeping it secret, which just isolates them further.
It sounds like a trap. I like that point about the CV versus values.
Oh, yeah, that was insightful. Focusing on someone's achievements, their job, their looks, the CV stuff, versus looking at their actual character, their kindness, their integrity, their values. Healthy attraction is usually more grounded in the latter.
Instead of just being impressed by the surface stuff.
Yeah.
That connects to the I can fix them idea too, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. That mentality is a common feature, this belief that you can be the one to change them, to heal their wounds.
Especially if there's, say, a strong physical connection.
Absolutely. Bonding, especially through sex, can really intensify those feelings and that fixer impulse, even when you consciously see major red flags, like that no pants anecdote illustrated recognizing a problem but feeling bonded anyway.
But for people with deep childhood abandonment issues, leaving feels almost impossible.
Yes, Pete Walker calls it the abandonment melange. It's this incredibly intense emotional flashback, a terror of being alone, that makes leaving feel catastrophic, even if the relationship is clearly unhealthy.
Wow. And then there's retrofitting, trying to make the LO fit the fantasy.
Yeah, in codependency, that's when you try to force the person into the idealized mold you've created, often using criticism, control, or other negative behaviors to try and shape them. It doesn't work, of course.
So it really seems like a core issue is putting the limerent object, the LO, on this massive pedestal.
Totally. They become idealized, seen as the only source of potential happiness, meaning the key to unlocking life itself.
Almost like worshiping them.
It can feel that way. And this sometimes ties into ideas you see in certain online spaces, concepts about perceived mate value imbalances, leading to intense longing when someone feels they lost someone of higher value. We need to be careful reporting on these ideas, just presenting them as they appear in the sources.
Right, neutrally. And it's important to think about the other side, too. Being the object of someone's limerence.
Yes, that perspective is crucial. One personal story really highlighted how uncomfortable, even distressing, it can be. And the point was made that someone deep in limerence, they might not actually be capable of consenting to a real balanced friendship because their perception is so skewed.
That's a really heavy ethical consideration. It makes you think about industries that might prey on that hope, too.
Definitely. Things like tarot readings, astrology hotlines, they can unfortunately exploit that desperate hope for connection that people in limerence feel.
It's grim. And we keep coming back to this idea that rejection, or the allo being aloof, actually makes the limerence stronger.
It's so paradoxical, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yes, rejection or unavailability often seems to intensify the feelings, not extinguish them.
Like throwing gasoline on the fire.
Pretty much. And this can lead to that limerent flip phenomenon.
The flip? What's that?
Where maybe there's clear rejection leading to initial despair, but then soon after there's this renewed hope, often based on absolutely minimal or misinterpreted signs. A tiny interaction gets blown way out of proportion.
It really reinforces that the LO isn't the real person, but this projection, this fantasy figure.
Exactly. The LO in the limerent person's head often bears little resemblance to the actual individual.
Could things like just being bored? Or feeling like your life lacks purpose. Could that make you more vulnerable?
That's a very plausible idea. Feeling unfulfilled, lacking excitement or meaning in your own life, it can create a kind of void. Limerence can rush in to fill that void, offering intense drama and focus, an escape from maybe a mundane reality.
A distraction almost.
A very consuming distraction. There's also the idea of transference, projecting feelings from past relationships onto someone new, though our sources suggested limerence is usually more about intense fixation on the current object.
And that feeling of life being black and white without them.
Yeah, that really captures the feeling. Like the ULO holds the only key to color, vibrancy, meaning. Everything else feels dull in comparison.
So are there typical types, people who tend to experience this or people who tend to become LOs?
Well, the sources do acknowledge their audience might skew things a bit, often hearing more from younger women.
Okay, bearing that in mind.
There seems to be a noticeable reporting among young women, sometimes in long-distance online relationships. The distance, the intermittent contact, the lack of clear reassurance, that can really breed limerence.
That makes sense. The ambiguity fuels it.
Right. And also, connections were drawn to young women maybe feeling pressured by family to achieve certain external goals, career, academics leaving them feeling internally empty. Sex in a relationship can seem like the answer to fill that void.
What about patterns in men?
Idealization happens there too, of course. Maybe putting women on an impossibly high pedestal or developing a kind of savior complex. There was that rather disturbing anecdote about the man obsessed with the woman he found unconscious.
Yeah, that was unsettling. It shows how detached from reality it can be. What about sex itself? How big a role does pure physical chemistry play?
It's important to say, great sex isn't a requirement for limerence. You can absolutely be limerent for someone you've never even touched.
Okay, that's key.
However, if sex is involved, especially for women, due to the neurobiology, oxytocin release, and bonding.
Right, the cuddle hormone.
Exactly. That can create really powerful feelings of attachment. Sometimes even if, logically the person isn't right for you, it makes discernment really important.
Like that analogy. Falling in love easily but leaving slowly is like drug addiction. You get hooked fast, but getting unhooked is hard.
That's a good way to put it. Which leads to, okay, how do we cultivate healthier connections? How do we move away from these patterns?
What's the advice for seeking healthy relationships?
Well, a big one is getting back to the real definition of dating. It's not just about casual sex, despite how it's often treated now. It's supposed to be about discovery.
Discovering who someone is.
Mm-hmm.
And if you actually want to be close to them long term?
Precisely. So things like structured dating, actually going on dates, having conversations, assessing compatibility become important, and communicating your intentions relatively early.
Like what you're actually looking for. Marriage, monogamy, kids.
Yeah. Things that people often feel awkward bringing up. There's this societal taboo, almost, against admitting you want serious commitment, especially early on.
Like you're not supposed to want marriage, you're supposed to be cool about it.
Exactly. But that hinders finding someone who wants the same things. Being authentic about your goals and needs, rather than playing the cool girl or cool guy, saves so much time and heartache. Don't waste your precious time pretending to be someone you're not for someone who might be wrong for you anyway.
That's really solid advice. So digging deeper into why some people seem susceptible and others don't, what's going on there?
Why do some people fall into these obsessive loops while others seem more resilient?
Yeah. What makes a difference?
One really compelling idea is this concept of the privilege of being loved.
Privilege of being loved. What does that mean?
It refers to people who grew up with consistent love, validation, feeling seen and supported. They tend to develop a stronger sense of inherent self-worth.
So they just expect better treatment. They have a lower tolerance for being messed around.
Essentially, yes. They haven't had to settle for scraps of affection. Contrast that with someone who's experienced a lot of loneliness, neglect, inconsistency.
They might tolerate more bad behavior.
It can lead to what's sometimes called crap fitting, putting up with unacceptable treatment because the need for any connection feels so overwhelming. Their standards are lower because their baseline was deprivation.
And that makes leaving abusive or unhealthy situations incredibly hard.
Immensely hard. Your confidence gets eroded, you fear being alone, you doubt you can cope.
So real freedom isn't about controlling the other person.
No, it's about that inner confidence, believing you can handle whatever life throws at you, whether you're in a relationship or not.
But if your childhood was chaotic or neglectful, change itself feels terrifying.
Understandably so. You might doubt your ability to cope. A key thing for people from those backgrounds is often learning to take less responsibility, stop blaming themselves for things that weren't their fault, stop overcompensating.
That's powerful. We touched on evolution earlier, speculating about a purpose. What about media? Does how we see relationships on screen affect things?
There's a feeling maybe that portrayals are getting a bit more realistic lately, especially with more women involved in writing and producing.
Compared to older stuff?
Yeah, compared to those old tropes. You know, the average guy relentlessly pursues the stunning woman who's clearly not interested, and eventually, against all odds, he wins her.
Right. That can set up some pretty unrealistic, even unhealthy expectations about persistence versus harassment.
Exactly. It can blur the lines. I like David Buss's idea that the best relationships are where both people feel they kind of got lucky, they both feel fortunate to be with the other person.
Mutual appreciation. That feels much healthier. Are there gender differences noted in who experiences limerence?
Again, acknowledging the potential audience skew, anecdotally more women report experiencing it.
Okay. Any other observations?
Just an anecdotal point that sometimes when men experience limerence towards someone, it can feel, well, more menacing or scary to the object of that affection.
Yeah, there's that birthday gift anecdote. Someone receiving an overly intense, unwanted gift. It highlighted how uncomfortable and genuinely frightening it can be to be on the receiving end.
Absolutely. And it's worth remembering, limerence isn't always romantic or sexual, is it?
Right. It can be about other things you intensely desire or fixate on.
Exactly. Like the example of someone having an intense childhood obsession with horses or escaping into the world of Little House on the Prairie. It's about that intense longing and focus.
Or even, say, a heterosexual person developing limerent feelings for a same-sex teacher.
Yes, that happens too. Often it seems to tap into a longing for a specific kind of figure, maybe nurturing, maybe idealized, like a desired maternal figure they never had.
So, okay, the big finale. Someone listening recognizes themselves in this description. They feel stuck in limerence. What can they actually do? What are the practical steps to break free?
The advice is pretty consistent and quite stark, honestly. Treat it like a serious addiction, like that heroin analogy again.
Which means?
Which primarily means cutting off contact. No contact with the limerent object. Full stop.
What if that's impossible? Like you work together or share a friend group?
Then you have to create as much distance as humanly possible. Minimize interactions ruthlessly. Leave the job if you have to. Change your social circles. It sounds extreme, but the hold can be that strong.
And internally, what about the thoughts?
You have to actively stop the mental loops, stop talking about them, stop analyzing, stop daydreaming. It's like managing intrusive thoughts in addiction recovery. Acknowledge it, then redirect your focus. Hard work, but necessary.
Having supportive friends must be key here.
Hugely important. Friends who will listen supportively, but also help you change the subject, stay grounded in reality, and not just endlessly rehash things about the LO.
Friends who don't enable the obsession.
Exactly. And removing triggers helps too. Sad songs, places you associate with them, etc.
What about healing practices?
Things like journaling, getting those difficult thoughts out, meditation or mindfulness to stay present, and maybe seeking help from someone you trust who can be direct and objective. Stoicism was mentioned as helpful for one person.
It sounds like a process of reclaiming your own mind and energy.
It really is. And holding on to the truth that genuine love, real connection, fulfilling relationships, they exist out here, in reality, not in the fantasy loop of limerence.
Wow. Okay, this has been a really thorough deep dive into something pretty complex, limerence.
It really is complex, a powerful, often painful state, tied up with intense desire, often linked back to our past, our unmet needs.
And understanding it, distinguishing it from healthy attraction, seeing its potential harm, that feels really crucial for anyone navigating relationships.
Absolutely. So if anything we talked about today resonated, maybe sparked some recognition, we really encourage you to reflect. Think about patterns in your own life, your relationships.
And there's hope, right? It's not a life sentence.
Definitely not. Overcoming limerence is possible. It takes self-awareness, often requires that hard step of cutting contact, seeking support, and really focusing on building a fulfilling life for yourself, grounded in reality.
So maybe a final thought to leave people with. Consider all that energy, the mental energy, the emotional energy that gets poured into a limerent object. Just imagine, what if you could redirect even half of that focus?
Towards genuine self-care, towards hobbies, passions, building your own life, towards cultivating real, reciprocal connections with people who are actually available and value you back.
What new possibilities might that unlock for you? Something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.